with CEOs and millionaires. I've never seen my vision be more crystal clear. Look in the mirror, see the change in who I used to be. I kept going, knew success would come eventually. But ask about me back then, they said I wouldn't make it. Nowadays they doubt less and tend to ask for favors. Poetic music, that's realness, don't let them tell you different. And if you ever lost in doubt, then follow your intuition. These words of wisdom is for those who's trying to find their purpose. Don't be living just to die, cause only death is certain. I'm working hard so I can toast to my accomplishments. Cause see, I lost it all and I ain't been the same since. I'm more focused, more ambitious, more everything. Grew up with nothing, now I appreciate the finer things. I know it's real when at the shows they ask for autographs. And now they know the name, they ain't gotta ask. Yeah.
First off, thanks for taking the time to do this. My next guest is Don Price. He's the vice commander of the Jewish War Post in Colorado, Post 344, out of Denver. And he's going to talk about what he did in the Navy and how his career kind of shaped his outlook on life and what he's doing today. And so, first off, thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Ben. I'm happy.
Awesome.
Glad.
So, if you could
COVID,
just,
and we got nothing else to do. So.
Yeah, no kidding. We're definitely making use of the time. That's for sure. First off, I just wanted to say, could you give a basic bio of, who you are, what your hometown is, the unit you served in the military, and then how you ended up in Colorado?
So, Don Price. I was actually born in Daytona Beach, Florida, where my World War II father was stationed during the Korean War, and he was the head of the reserve training. So he got called up, served in World War II, got called up for Korea, and was serving in Daytona Beach, Florida when I was born. But the family actually lived in Savannah, Georgia. So father's side was from Atlanta, mother's side was from Savannah. Back, grandparents and great grandparents from the Savannah area. So grew up in Savannah. We moved back to Savannah when I was 2 months old or something. So grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and then went for college to the Naval Academy. And after the Naval Academy, served on nuclear submarines with, went through my Hyman Rickover interview and got selected for subs. And then they send you to about a year's worth of nuclear training, and then 4 years on a nuclear submarine, making what were called strategic deterrent patrols. So we'd go out for 3 months and be on station undetected, ready to launch. And as I mentioned, did that for about 4 years, and then got out of the military, though I stayed in the reserves, and I transitioned from being a submarine officer designated to being an engineering duty officer, and worked in the reserves, was never mobilized in the reserves, but my gaining command, as they called it, was the Charleston Naval Shipyard most of the time. And I worked for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which was an easy transition from being on a nuclear submarine to regulating commercial nuclear power plants that generate electricity and are owned by electric utilities. Did that for a few years, and eventually could not take the government anymore. So went back to school, went to Philadelphia, got an MBA, and helped start a little consulting company where we worked with mostly electric utilities on how to be, nothing to do with engineering, but how to be organizationally more efficient. So how could they reduce their costs and still be safe and still have high availability of their plants or transmission and distribution systems or whatever we were looking at, yet do it at a lower cost, which essentially meant do it more efficiently with the people resources that they had. So did that for a long time, and lived in, so going back for a minute on the submarine, I lived in Charleston, South Carolina. The boat was out of Rota, Spain, so we'd fly over there every 3 months and take the boat out, and then fly after the 3 months. We'd fly back to Charleston, and then when I got out, lived in Atlanta with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and went and got an MBA in Philadelphia, and then started this little company in the DC area, and did that for about 15 years. And then we got bought out by a larger company and continued to do that, for another, 5 or 10 years, and then I quit and retired.
So basically, you're an underachiever, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And and we lived in we were living in Annapolis, outside the D.C. area, because we adopted 2 kids from Russia, and in the schools, it turns out in D.C. were terrible. So we moved to Annapolis, and I'm telling you, you asked the question, how did I end up in Colorado, and this is the answer to that. And I was at a friend's house. And like all my friends in Annapolis, their walls were covered with pictures of them and their sailboats. And I went back to my house, and our walls were covered with pictures of me and my wife hiking up in the mountains. And so I said, there's something wrong with this picture. We need to move. And by that time, my consulting, you can live anywhere. Just as long as I can get to an airport, I can live anywhere. So we did some, I put together an algorithm, did some research, and Colorado and Boulder popped up as the best places. So we moved here in 2007, and 2 kids went to elementary, middle, and high school here, and that's it. That's the answer to the question. That's how I got here.
That's awesome. And then, when you were growing up, were your parents immigrants at all, or were they born in the States?
Oh, no, they were born in the States. So they, it turns out, surprisingly, both sides came from Alsace-Lorraine.
Okay.
So a part of, the border between France and Germany, depending upon the year, sometimes it was French, sometimes it was German. Yeah. And Strasbourg is the main city there. And we actually had some relatives who came over to the U.S., who we got out and came over to the U.S. during World War II, and then went back after the war. And I have never met them, but I've talked to them on the phone, and in fact was going over there to meet them for the first time, and we canceled it because of COVID.
Oh,
so about 9 months ago or so. But they came over on both sides. So Price, who the heck knows what the original word, what the original name was, but clearly when they came over, somebody said, well, that sounds like Price, but who knows what it was. And Mom was a Levy, and both sides came over, I think, in about the 1870s, 1880s, something like that. The Price side actually settled in Maryland, in Cumberland, Maryland. So kind of the western part of Maryland, a little bit frontiersy. Mm-hmm. And the Levy side actually went to New Orleans, and then made its way to Savannah. Both were, as far back as we know, everybody was a shopkeeper. So probably not that unusual. But on the Price side, traveling salesman, and my grandfather made his way to Atlanta as a traveling salesman and met my mother, who was met his wife, Strauss, and they were working in a small, actually in Atlanta, Georgia, working in a mink coat store, in the early 1900s, and had dad. So he grew up in Atlanta, and my great grandparents that made it to Savannah opened a big department store. So there was
okay.
the biggest department store in Savannah, Georgia, was Levy's department store, and it eventually got bought by who knows, some chain in the 50s, I guess.
Right.
And then my father started a small store, a luggage store, luggage and gifts. So growing up, we had a little store on the main street. And from the age of 7 or 8, I remember working in the store. So selling things and, helping put things in the showcases. And, I would sell tobacco, to people that would come in just as a little kid. So, you learn a lot of stuff working in a little store. So I don't know what you asked, but that's
no,
answer.
that's great.
Oh, you asked generations. So were my parents immigrants? And the answer was no. Alsace-Lorraine and shopkeepers on both sides.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful area there too. It's definitely country in that part of France. They don't really have a lot of natural resources, and so that was a really contested area. That's one of the things that the Prussians wanted to have, because they were building a lot of rail lines during that time in the 1860s, and so they needed to get that stuff over to their side of the Rhine. What year were you born?
52. So during Korea.
Gotcha.
And I've got one brother who was born in 46. So 9 years older.
And the reason why I asked that is because I kind of wanted to know a little bit about your life growing up, because obviously in the South, civil rights movement was going on during that time, and you were old enough to at least comprehend probably what was going on, and probably either in middle school or high school at that time. So it was a very interesting time. So I just wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. So it certainly was an interesting time, but I was I was pretty oblivious. So so we had a store, as I mentioned, and we would serve anybody that came into the store, because money. Trying to, this was not a big store. This was a, like the size of a 7-Eleven, vaguely kind of store, and we did not make much money in this store, and heaven knows why. So Dad, Joe, told me one time that so he didn't graduate from college. He had 1 year of college. So this is all kind of putting it into perspective, the question you asked about civil rights and growing up in the South during civil rights. And so he had 1 year of college, went to University of Virginia for a year. The money ran out, he says, and but he had the 1 year of college, and there was a program in, who knows when it was, I don't remember, 1940 or so, where they would take people with 1 year of college and make them officers. After that, after his class, you had to have 2 years of college and you wouldn't qualify, but he only needed 1 year. So he joined up and he became an officer in the Navy. And then he ended up moving back to Savannah, and nobody had much money. And so he opened this little store, and it was never very successful. Tiny little store, but it was enough, what's success, who knows, right. But enough to provide for us. But, we would service anybody came in the store. We're happy you're there, and we'll sell you anything you want. But Savannah definitely had the main street, which was primarily just for whites. And most stores, I would say, would not serve black people that came into their stores. And then there was a different street that was all black-owned businesses, and most blacks would shop in that area. And, restaurants were segregated, and water fountains were segregated, and public bathrooms were segregated. And I, Don Price, I think probably everybody that was growing up and was Jewish my friends were probably fairly sensitive to that. For most of our friends growing up, my non-Jewish friends, it's like, well, that's the way it is. I mean, of course it would be that way. Why'd you want people that are black going to school with you? Or it doesn't make any sense. They have their own schools, they have their own stores, they have their own restaurants, and and it would be nice if I could say, well, obviously I saw that and I said that's wrong, but you didn't. I mean, that's just the way it was. I mean, it's just, you don't even, as a kid, I didn't even think about it. I mean,
Yeah,
so
I definitely think that today's society needs to do a better job of not judging the past on today's standards. And you bring up a great point with that, because when you grow up around that, you really don't know any different if everybody else around you thinks it's okay as well. Unless your
right.
parents are implying that something's not right here, how would you know the difference?
Right. And my, on the one hand, we were pretty progressive to the extent that we'd serve anybody that came in the store. On the other hand, I mean, I remember my grandmother, saying things that in retrospect were just unbelievable, about black people.
Yeah.
And, but, so she's, if my parents were born, let's say in 1918, roughly. So if she was 20, so she was in the late 1800s born, probably. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's just, who knows, but definitely segregated growing up. Didn't think much about it, certainly in elementary school and middle school. The first year in high school, we desegregated. So we had black kids that came into the school, and I was in the band, and we had some black kids in the band. I didn't even think anything of it. I said, well, okay, this makes sense. We had, surprisingly, and so I'll go back there for reunions, and we just had our 50th high school reunion. And one of the kids, we had an ROTC unit at Savannah High School, and one of the kids in the ROTC unit became the first major general in the Marine Corps. Mm. And he was at he gave a little talk at our 50th high school reunion. And he said, to paraphrase, that, he was very nervous being one of the first black kids at Savannah High School. And he didn't know what to expect. And what he found was that the teachers and students were great. And the only thing they cared about was how hard he wanted to work and how well he did. And so they were supportive. They taught him that the only thing that mattered was not the color of his skin, but how hard he wanted to work and what he wanted to do with his life. And he took that as a message that then, made him into if you can believe him, made him into a Major General Marine Corps.
Yeah, that's great. And then when you were growing up, did your family belong to a congregation of any kind? Was it just kind of, you were just kind of surviving, and as far as, the business was probably taking a lot of precedent and, making sure that
so the main street in Savannah was Broughton Street, and there was something called the Jewish Mafia. So that was, not half, but there were lots of Jewish merchants that had stores on Broughton Street, and some of the best stores. I mentioned that the Levy's department store, but Asher's women's store, Fine's women's store, Castle's shoe store. So we were all friends. The parents were friends of all these stores. I mean, it's just, in retrospect, it's amazing how many Jewish merchants there were growing up in Savannah. And we actually had 3 congregations. So we had in Savannah, Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox. And what at the time, and still is, the Reformed congregation is the 3rd oldest Jewish congregation in the United States. And in fact, we have on we have a little museum essentially now, because Savannah has become a big deal. So growing up, Savannah was, just this little town with all these really cool old buildings downtown that were all, falling down, and, it was just terrible. But since the book is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which was this national bestseller about Savannah, essentially it was a novel. And people started coming to Savannah to check this place out and realize that there were all these gorgeous buildings downtown. And downtown is laid out. It was the first town in the United States that was designed as a town. So it's all in a matrix pattern, and they've got all these what they call squares, little parks downtown. And so it's just gorgeous now. But growing up, it wasn't anything, it was all falling apart. But now it's just a gorgeous place. So at any rate, we were members of the Reformed congregation. So one of the third oldest in the United States. And, I became president of TYG, the Temple Youth Group, and we were members of SEFTY, Southeast Federation of Temple Youth. And, that was just kind of normal. All my friends were. Now, because it was the South, I think, a Reformed congregation in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s in the South, all they wanted to do was assimilate. So there was no Hebrew school. There were no bar mitzvahs. It was confirmation class. And we had Sunday school every Sunday. The services had very little Hebrew in them. It was almost all just English, some things, but very different than if you go to a Reformed congregation these days.
Yeah.
So
did you guys have camp or anything like that? Like a lot of the people from the Northeast?
So there was a SEFTY camp, yes, in the mountains of North Georgia. There was a camp that, for kids that I went to not very often, maybe just twice, because it cost money. And, we did not have expendable money. And, and I was not big on stuff like that anyway. I mean, I don't think I lobbied saying, gee, I really ought to go. And I don't think most of the kids that I knew, we probably had 8 or 10 kids in my confirmation class. And I don't think any of them went to camp SEFTY. I went 1 or 2 years, and it was okay, but it didn't do anything for me. But I did go. We did have the Jewish Educational Alliance, which is what we called a Jewish community center. And it was wonderful. And every summer, I would go for a month to summer camp at the Alliance, is what it was called, Jewish Educational Alliance. And it was in an almost brand new building. So actually a very strong Jewish community in Savannah. And they had a pool, and they had a tennis court, and they had a game room, and they had, basketball courts. And my brother was a counselor there, and you do arts and crafts. And so, some good memories from spending a month every summer there. So that was the equivalent of camp, I guess.
Yeah. And then take me back to ultimately what led you to be intrigued by the military. Was it that your father was in the military at some point, or something else?
So Dad had retired. Dad had been, as I mentioned, had served in World War II in the South Pacific. And unfortunately, Ben, do you have any regrets yet? Well, Don, have a bunch of regrets. And one of the biggest regrets is that I never really talked to Dad about World War II and about his service. So I don't know a whole lot. I know that he served in the South Pacific. He was in Auckland, New Zealand, and he was on Fiji Island, not on a boat, not on a ship. And it's not clear to me what he did. I think he was on somebody's staff, that was assigned there. But the house, our house had lots of his memorabilia in it. So his Navy sword was on the wall. and his certificate from when he crossed the equator, and when he got commissioned. And so there's all this stuff there, and we used to go. So Savannah had what used to be Hunter Army Airfield, that then became Hunter Air Force Base, and then became Hunter Army Airfield again, which was for fixed wing helicopters. But at any rate, we'd play golf there. We would go to the officers club there. So although he was, I was not alive when he was in the military, and he had been, when he got recalled to active duty, he contracted. So he was recalled to active duty in Daytona Beach, Florida, and he came down with multiple sclerosis and was, for periods of time, completely incapacitated, and then it would go away, but it's a degenerative kind of disease. But at any rate, when he first got it, he was an invalid. I mean, he couldn't move a muscle, and he couldn't walk. He couldn't use any of his limbs. He could breathe. And so the military, not knowing at that time and even now how you contract multiple sclerosis, he was retired. I mean, the Navy retired him from the military, physically retired him. So he retired as a commander in the Navy. And so therefore, being retired, we could access, the exchange and the officers club and all this stuff right at Hunter Army Airfield. So I grew up, with a lot of military stuff, going on. And my brother Jay went to the University of Georgia, went to Armstrong Community College for 2 years, and then to the University of Georgia for 2 years, and got a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. And then said, well, what the hell am I going to do with a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology? So, and this was in 1964, and the military was just starting to ramp up some due to Vietnam. Yeah. And so they were looking for officers. And so he joined the Air Force, and he became a pilot in the Air Force, and he had a 25-year career as a as an Air Force pilot. So in 1969, when I'm a senior in high school, essentially I had two choices. How does a kid, as nobody knows what they want to do with their life. I mean, a few people do, but most people, when you're 16, 17 years old, what the hell are you going to do with your life? Nobody knows. Right. So people told me that I was good at math and science, so I should be an engineer. So I said, okay, works for me. So the choices were either Georgia Tech, which I'd never been to before, or I got into the Naval Academy, which I'd never been to before. The Naval Academy was free, and Georgia Tech, we would have had to pay tuition, which back then was hardly anything, but nonetheless, free was a lot better than paying tuition because we didn't have hardly any money anyway. So I went to Naval Academy, based on Dad was in the military. My brother's been in the military. They both seem to like it. So maybe I'll like it. So went to the Naval Academy, got an appointment to the Naval Academy. And now I am what's called a blue and gold officer, which means that I advise kids that high school kids that want to go to the Naval Academy, what it's like to go to the Naval Academy. Well, I didn't have a blue and gold officer, and I hadn't any idea. Back then you didn't even go, now college kids in high school, they have to go visit the colleges that they want to go to and get the look and feel of the place. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't visit Naval Academy. I didn't visit Georgia Tech. It's just you apply to a place, and if you get in, you get to go. That's wonderful. So I showed up at the Naval Academy, I didn't even wonder what it was going to be like. It's like going to college, you go to college, just that you got to wear a uniform and maybe they yell at you a little bit. Well, I was in for a very rude awakening. Plebe year, your first year at the Naval Academy. And it was the worst experience. Nobody in their right mind, knowing what I know now, there's no possible way I would have gone to the Naval Academy because it's just, I mean, the first year. After the first year, it's okay, but the first year is the most painful thing I've ever done in my life. I mean, I was run, I mean, I hadn't been in ROTC. I didn't know anything, I mean, I was just harassed unbelievably, as was everybody. I mean, I don't think there was any anti-Semitism I mean, there probably was, but I wasn't harassed because I was Jewish. I was harassed because I was, a plebe and I was young because in Savannah, they had this big program. Big program is you can do junior high in 2 years instead of 3. And so they offered that to me, and my parents said, oh, this will be a great, what an honor. Well, it's not an honor. What you do is you lose all your friends, and they put you in with people that are a year older, which in junior high is a big deal. So I'm already a little bit shy, and now they put me in with all these older kids, and granted it's only a year older, but when you're in junior high, a year older is like, so I got no friends, and I'm already young. So I graduated from high school at 17 and go to the Naval Academy at 17. And it was just heavens. It was not any fun. And I wasn't athletic. Everybody else there had been, played football or, done all these things. I had been in the band. I played clarinet, and so, and you got to run and you got to do all this physical stuff. And I was just, it was not an easy thing to do.
I had a friend of mine who went to West Point when I was in high school, and I thought about going as well, but my grades sucked so bad that I would have had to go to the prep school that they have in New Jersey for that year. So it's basically a freebie year of nothing, of basically doing your plebe year twice. I was just like, I think I'll pass. Yeah.
Well, I actually advise kids now that it's actually, a good thing if offered. But so one of the stories from the Naval Academy is one of the things you have to take as a plebe is you have to take boxing. You got to take boxing, you got to take wrestling, you got to take martial arts, you got to do all this stuff, and I got no idea. I don't know any of this stuff. I'm having a hard enough time doing sit-ups. So they pair you up in boxing class. They stand everybody against the wall and they by height and they count you off in 2s, and that's who you're going to go box with. Well, I'm, I'm like 5'9", 115 pounds, and I get paired up with people that are 5'9", 160 pounds because they're all, football players or rugby players or something. And I get the shit beat out of me every friggin' time. And it's just terrible. And then finally, just about the last day of class, somehow there was a kid that was even skinnier than I was that I got paired up with. And I said, okay, I am facing a moral dilemma. Should I go easy on this kid, because he's the skinniest kid I've ever seen in my life? Or should I go really hard like all these other people have with me? I'd be boxing with all these other guys and the coaches would be screaming for my blood. They'd be saying, hit him in the nose. We want to see some blood, So it was just terrible. But finally, I get this one kid, and it was just, I said, well, maybe I'll take it easy. But then you land your first punch on the guy's face, and it feels so good that you just can't stop yourself. And so you just, so I beat the shit out of this guy.
Yeah. Why
and
not?
then for the exam, for some reason I missed the exam. I was sick or something. So we had to do a makeup. And one of my friends at the Naval Academy was this guy, Steve Cohen. And so we arranged that we would do the exam. The final exam is you got to box with somebody and you get graded on it. So we would do it together and we'd kind of take it easy. But Steve, he was about my height, but he was a big guy, didn't, and so he beat the shit out of me also. But that's okay. It happens. So after the first year, though, the Naval Academy was a fine place. And it's a great place, as they say, to be from, not necessarily to attend.
Right. And so you graduate, you get your commission, you go to OCS and do your basic
So you don't
course.
go to OCS. So once you graduate from the Naval Academy, you are commissioned as an officer in either the Navy or the Marine Corps. And prior to graduation, you select what you want to do. So you could go in the Marine Corps, you could fly a Navy jet off a carrier, you could be on a surface ship, or you could be on a submarine. And the submarines were at the time pretty much all nuclear, and they were taking the smartest kids. So you had to have really good grades to be selected to go to a nuclear submarine, because you had to operate this nuclear power plant. And as you may or may not know, the head of the nuclear navy was this guy, Hyman Rickover, who had immigrated to the United States from Poland to Chicago in the 1910s or 1905s, and had gotten an appointment to the Naval Academy with the class of 1924, and had served in World War II on submarines and destroyers, he's a very famous person.
I've actually seen a documentary about him.
Yeah.
Or he's on 60 Minutes, and like he was around for like 50 years, right?
So he is the longest serving officer in any branch of the service, because the Navy wanted to get rid of him. So after he pushed through the concept of putting nuclear power plants on submarines, and nobody would listen to him because it was going to cost so much money that there wouldn't be as many battleships, and there wouldn't be as many aircraft carriers, and there wouldn't be as many jets to fly. But he was able to convince Chester Nimitz, who at the time was the chief of naval operations post-World War II, that this had a lot of strategic value. And so he was able to get it done, and he made 1 million enemies in the Navy. And the Navy wanted to kick him out, but Congress saw the wisdom in having these nuclear submarines, because you could put ballistic missiles on submarines and they could go for long periods of time undetected. And so as a deterrent to keep the Soviet Union from at the time, thinking of firing nuclear warhead missiles at the United States, if you've got these nuclear warheads and nobody knows where they are because they're in the ocean somewhere, you could always respond to that. So it ended up being a great thing. Congress was all for it. The Navy wanted to kick him out. Congress demanded that the Navy keep him and continue to promote him. So, that's why he stuck around. But what you have to do is so there was a concern. The concern was from Congress, how do we know that these nuclear power plants that you're putting on submarines are going to be safe and they're not going to blow up, or they're not going to be all these spills? How do you know that? And Rickover said, because I guarantee that only the best people, I will hand select the best people, and I will interview every officer that ever serves on any of these submarines to make sure that they are honest and smart and all these other things. So then, because of that, he had to interview everybody that served on nuclear submarines. So it became infamous that you would go for your Rickover interview in Washington, D.C. And so I did that. So in 1973, they put you, everybody that's going nuclear power, they put you in a bus, they take you to Washington, D.C., and you get this Rickover interview, which consists of 3 or 4 technical interviews with his staff to make sure, that your grades really are good and that you know what you're talking about, and, you can pass that kind of stuff. And then you go in for your Rickover interview. So you go into this little room, Rickover's office, and, there's this desk, and it's dark. He's got all the blinds drawn, and he's doing this to make you feel uncomfortable. So the blinds are drawn, it's all dark. He's got a little lamp on his desk. There's one chair that you're supposed to sit in. You go sit in the chair. He's looking down, and he looked exactly like my grandfather. So, white-haired, little, tiny, kind of shriveled up old guy. Old. He was probably, at that time, I don't know, he's probably in his 60s and, ancient, because anybody in their 60s, they must be almost dead.
Yeah.
Now that I'm in my 60s, it's not so true, but nonetheless. And he looks up at me and he says, "Now, Midshipman Price, why were your grades so bad your first year at the Naval Academy?" And I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to respond to this? And first off, and the reason they were so bad was because I was a plebe, and he knows that because he was a plebe too. And my grades were only terrible my first semester at the Naval Academy because I couldn't even study. I was getting run around by the upper class so badly. But the second semester I did pretty good. So I want to make sure he knows that. So I said, "Admiral, It was my first semester at the Naval Academy and that's as far as I got. And he got out of his chair and he started screaming profanity at me and said, I didn't ask you what your grades were your first semester. Get the hell out of my office. And number one, I'd never met an admiral before. I'd never been yelled at by an admiral. So there's a commander, which is a fairly high ranking naval officer, a commander there with me. And he says, okay, let's go. And so they take you up, you go in the hallway, they take you to a closet. And in this closet, there's a desk and a little lamp. And they put you in the closet and they say, now I'll be back. Think about what the admiral asked. Think about what you said, and I'll come back. So he left me there for what seemed like a couple of days, but it was probably only 20 minutes or so, and what are you going to do in this little tiny closet, with a desk and there's nothing in the drawers and you're going crazy. Finally he comes back. You go back in the admiral's office. Admiral's still sitting there looking down. And he looks up again and he says, now, Midshipman Price, as we were saying, why were your grades so bad your first year at the Naval Academy? And I said, Admiral, I didn't study enough. He said, well, that's a good answer. Okay, we're done. So that was it. So then I was in the nuclear Navy. So then after graduation, you go to a year's worth of training. I went to 6 months in Maryland and 6 months outside of Hartford, Connecticut, where they has a land-based nuclear power plant outside of Hartford. Nobody knows about or knew about. It's decommissioned now. And then you go to a submarine. Then I went to Charleston and was on one of these submarines with a crew and did about 6 or 7 what they call strategic deterrent patrols. And you just go out underwater for almost 3 months at a time, remain undetected, don't let anybody know where you are, but always be ready to launch a missile. And, you'd practice launching missiles, and it was pretty cool. But
this was mid-'70s, like post-Vietnam-ish time?
Yeah, so this was 74 through 78.
Okay.
Roughly. And we had treaty commitments with NATO countries that we would have a certain number of missiles targeted on the Soviet Union at all times. So it was very important to be on station, undetected, ready to launch. And it was, it was, in retrospect, it was probably the most fun I have ever had. But you don't think that at the time. At the time, everybody is on a nuclear submarine, and it's long hours, and it's hard work, and it's very demanding. And you're separated, you get months of separation, and you're not in contact with anybody. So it's very hard life. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I wanted to do something different. And so that's why I didn't know what it was, but that's why I got out, and now, of course, in retrospect, what fun it was, surfacing and diving these submarines and shooting torpedoes and shooting missiles. I mean, and nobody does that. In the general population, there's nobody that did the things that I did. But at the time, that's what everybody did. All my friends were doing the same thing. And so what's so unusual about that? It doesn't sound like it's anything cool. So I didn't have any perspective. So,
yeah. No, I definitely can relate with that. I know that a lot of folks, like I was a Green Beret for almost 10 years. I did like 2 years initially in the 3 years in the regular Army and then switched over. But the common thread that I see a lot of people facing is they don't realize what they have until it's gone, in a sense of, I would say just the carefree attitude of like just going to work and not having to worry about the daily stresses of life that normal folks face, because you're going to get paid. So that's out the gate, right? And you just concentrate on your craft. And I think that people deeply miss that when they leave. And obviously the camaraderie between the folks. I think you have a different depth in relationships that it takes years to build up out in the real world. And you have that pretty instantaneously because of the gates that you have gone through together, not only individually, but as a unit. And so that's definitely one of the takeaways that I get a lot of enjoyment out of, like talking with folks like yourself, just because I know that you've done something different than the linear path that a lot of our contemporaries have taken in their lives, and they've missed out, I think, in some ways on what we have. So I'm very satisfied in a lot of ways to just continue to to change the narrative and kind of do it the way you want to do it, as opposed to what other people want you to do.
Yeah.
So with the daily life and the daily grind of being in a sub, I know obviously it's very tight constraints as far as space is concerned, and just the low level of oxygen and things like that. Did you ever feel that your body wasn't able to handle the pressures of the physical and physiological, side effects of being in a sub for that long?
No. So I never even think about it. I mean, you're 22 years old and you don't know any difference, and you're just on a submarine, and it seems very normal. It's normal to be on a submarine. I couldn't imagine working in an office or something like that. So, I mean, submarines are cool places, and it's jam packed with equipment, and that's what your life is like, and it's just normal. It's like the store in Savannah, Georgia. That I mean, it's just that becomes normal to you. And, I have had the privilege. One of the other things that I do now is I'm president of the USS Colorado Submarine Association. So as you probably know, Colorado has a brand new nuclear submarine named for the state, and we go visit it. And it's just, seeing what these things look like now, for all intents and purposes, the same as it was then. And it's just a very nice. I mean, you live in a little stateroom and it's tiny, but that's your world. And, you got the torpedo room, and it's just, you feel very much at home. I'm sure I will always feel at home being on a submarine. And they have certain smells, and they have the food and the camaraderie with the other people in the wardroom, and the people that are the enlisted guys that are in your division. And now, it's really changed a lot. Not the submarines haven't really changed that much, big picture, but the camaraderie of the crew, I think, is much better than it was back then. Now, maybe that's because back then we still had a draft, and so although you had to volunteer to be on a submarine, lots of enlisted guys didn't want to be in the military, and so they were still kind of unhappy, and all they wanted to do was get out. Now, I mean, it's a team. I mean, it's like being on a football team, and it's a small organization. It's 120, 130 people, which is very different than a large Navy surface ship where there's maybe 1,000 people. So because it's relatively smaller, you can know almost everybody on a first name basis, and you become involved in their lives. And, they have lots of crew and family gatherings where everybody can socialize together, enlisted and officer. And it's just a very nice teamwork, and teamwork is emphasized. I never remember the word teamwork, when we were on a submarine. It was more like a job, and you just had to go do all this stuff. One of the guys, another board member in this USS Colorado Submarine Association, is a former Navy commanding officer of a submarine. And he agrees that there's just so different. I mean, he had a 25-year career in the Navy in submarines, and just the camaraderie and the culture. So the culture of the submarine community now compared to what it was in the 70s is leaps and bounds different. So,
and is there a differentiation in culture within the coasts as well? Because I know that's like in some other parts of the Navy, you have East Coast, West Coast, kind of, different things. So the sub's the same?
I don't know. So the Colorado is on the East Coast, as was the James K. Polk, the submarine that I was on. The crew was on the East Coast, and I know that there are differences, but I don't think that there are. I don't think that there are big differences. If you were in the Navy, if you were in the submarine community, you would probably be able to identify differences. But but that's because you're so close to it. If you were back a little bit, you'd probably say it's the same.
Got it. And then talk about your transition out of the service and maybe elaborate on the time frame, because obviously you said 78, so a lot of things are going on during that time. And then we also had, a lot of like strategic things going on. So, Soviet Union invades Afghanistan around that same time. Jimmy Carter's president. We have the Iran hostage situation going on all around those same times. Did you feel like when you got out that, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a sense of guilt, but in a sense of like there's the chapter's coming to an end, and you definitely know that. And then was there any pressure from your command or from others to try to keep you to stay in active duty?
Well, they definitely wanted me to stay in on active duty, and they were very surprised that I wanted to get out. But the commanding officer was not a very good role model. And, he was very much a bureaucrat, and it was kind of like a job, and I realize now, again, all the cool things that submarines do and that they did back then, and that, just as a intelligence gathering platform, I mean, they are instrumental, a significant part of the U.S. military and what we are, from a strategic and a tactical standpoint, what we are able to do in the world. And, I didn't realize that then. And so it was much more like a job. And the commanding officer was just kind of like a bureaucrat, not a Captain Queeg from whatever that was, Mutiny on the Bounty. But that wasn't Mutiny on the Bounty, but whatever it was. But, it was just not a good role model. I mean, nice guy, but just kind of, I don't know. And no, did I want to stay in and aspire to be like him? And the answer was no, I don't think so. And there must be something else out in the big world that I should be doing. And yes, there was lots of attempts to keep me in, and give me other things to do, and even after you get out, they send you. They were sending letters because the Navy that those that remained had to stay, couldn't go to shore duty because there weren't enough people to man the boats and go to shore duty. So the more people that got out, the longer people had to stay on submarines before they could rotate onto some shore duty. So it just made it really hard. They weren't giving bonuses then. Now they give big bonuses. So now, you can make some money, a lot of money, by being willing to stay on a nuclear submarine. But back then they weren't. And so, so it was a very easy transition from being part of the nuclear Navy to becoming part of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which was a government agency that used to be part of be part of DOE, essentially Department of Energy, but was part of the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, but had recently split off and was its own agency, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they were recruiting. So a lot of people. So back then, the U.S. had a gigantic building program of commercial nuclear power plants. And so there were lots of companies, electric utilities, Westinghouse, General Electric, that were building these plants, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that was regulating the plants. And so lots of guys were getting out, and it was just an easy transition because there were so many jobs available making very good money.
Is that the same organization that goes and checks like WMD stuff, for like example in Iraq during the war? Is that the same agency or something else?
So I don't know. So I would have said weapons of mass destruction were being checked by the IAEA.
Got it.
So the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is in Austria. Is the capital Austria?
Vienna.
So in Vienna. So the NRC didn't. They regulated almost all commercial nuclear power plants and civilian and educational power plants. So a lot of universities at the time had little tiny power plants that they used as part of the instruction, like Georgia Tech did, and hospitals had nuclear material that they used for imaging. And so we regulated that, but that was about it. Nothing international. So it was an easy transition. I worked for them for about 5 years, and so it was a big change. So I remember one of the first days that I was at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they gave me all this stuff I got to do, and it's like 5 o'clock, and I had some questions, so I went out in the hallway because on a submarine, and maybe a movie, once every few days. As a junior officer, you're working the whole time. There is more work for 3 months at a time than you can possibly do. So you're standing watch, and you're taking care of the enlisted guys in your division, and those enlisted guys are responsible for, the electrical system or the instrumentation and control system. So you got to be helping them troubleshoot things, and you got to be qualifying yourself for whatever the next position is. So you're working 24/7 other than sleeping 8 hours a day. And this is 7 days a week. I mean, as you know, there's no time off. You got time off when you go back, when you get off the boat, but when you're 3 months at a time with the boat, you're working nonstop. So at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in an office building in Atlanta, Georgia, and I got some questions, and I go out in the hallway, and it's dead. The lights are turned off, and there's nobody there. And I'm just thinking, well, it's only 5 o'clock, where is everybody? So the culture, and I don't say this in a disparaging way, the way to say it is that the culture of the nuclear Navy was so different. It's, you just work until you get things done. You don't stop working. And that's not normal compared to most of the rest of the industry, the non-military industry, where it's a job, but we work here 9 to 5. We're not staying past 5 o'clock. In fact, they would have managers that would go to the elevators. You couldn't leave early because everybody wanted to leave early, but then when it was 5 o'clock, everybody could leave. So they'd make sure people weren't leaving early. And there were a lot of people that had retired in place, which means that, they were doing other things. Yeah, they got their job as a Nuclear Regulatory Commission inspector, but they're also real estate agents, or they're doing these pyramid marketing schemes, where you sell. The one I remember is Shackley, so we have guys that sold door to door, would sell. It's just a pyramid scheme, you make money by having other people working for a few years, but I couldn't really see doing this for a long time. And I might add, if there was any, not anti-Semitism, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Atlanta at the time, there was a noontime Bible study group that met over lunch. And I still remember, lots of people got asked to join the Bible study group. And I remember competing for several promotions. And the people that got the promotions were the ones attending the Bible study group. So, that irked me a little bit. And so finally it irked me enough that I complained to my wife. And let me also add, and I don't know how interesting all this stuff is, but when I decided to leave the Navy, I remember my parents saying, Don, we'd love to put you through law school, or maybe you'd like to go to medical school. And I just remember thinking, gee, parents are so old, they have no idea what they're even talking about. I have been to an extra year of advanced study in nuclear engineering. I don't need to go to law school or go to med school. I'll just do this nuclear stuff. Retrospect, maybe I should have. And she says, Don, why don't you go to business school? Why don't you go to a really good business school? And I never even thought of that. I was going to go work maybe on electric utility or something. But, it opened my eyes, and I started looking at law schools. She actually said, why don't you go to law school, or why don't you go to business school or something? So I started looking at those and realized how many neat careers there could be. if, and this was in the 80s, how many neat careers there could be if I transitioned out of nuclear completely and went to business school and did something after that, either on Wall Street or management consulting. So I applied to a bunch of business schools, and it seemed better than law school, and did not get accepted into Harvard, which have always been bummed about. But my second choice was Warton in Philadelphia. Got accepted there, so went to Warton for 2 years and had the most fun that I've ever had in my life, just because it was so relatively easy. After having gone to the Naval Academy, and I majored in aerospace engineering, and then having gone through a year of nuclear, advanced nuclear studies, everything at Warton was just a piece of cake. And so it was just lots of fun doing that. And still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but it looked like either Wall Street or management consulting, and ended up going management consulting. And but rather than go with a big firm, I had run into a guy that worked at a big firm who was a Naval Academy graduate, and we essentially decided when I graduated to start our own little company, which we did, and it was just wonderful. Working for a very small little management consulting company, and we just had a blast.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's tough sometimes. You try and try again in business, and you try to find your niche and kind of where you belong. And that's great that you were able to get that early on, as opposed to maybe later on in life in that sense. I guess the question I have for you is, like, looking back at everything, do you care about legacy at all or anything like that? Or is it just you live and let live kind of situation for you?
I'm not sure I even know what legacy means as you are trying to use it.
Like what
say a few more words about.
Sure. Legacy meaning like what people, perceive you to be. Like, what are you leaving behind for the other folks?
Well, I say no. So I really think so. I don't think my parents ever impressed anything upon me growing up in terms of legacy. I mean, they were just working too hard. Dad worked 6.5 days a week, and had to work on some on Sundays, and the big season was Christmas. So we did 75% of all our income was between Thanksgiving and Christmas Day. So we didn't even celebrate Hanukkah. We got no time. I mean, I'm working at the store as they are from 9 in the morning till 9 at night. So that's when we were open. Normally we close at 6, but between Thanksgiving and Christmas, you're working, 12-hour days, and there's no time for anything else. And we would all have a Christmas dinner because, we would close the store at 6 p.m. Christmas Eve. I mean, Christmas was a big deal. And in Savannah, Reform, all my friends, we had Christmas trees. Sometimes we call them Hanukkah bushes, but we had Christmas trees, and we didn't do much for Hanukkah because there's just not time. I mean, you're working at the store. What are you going to do? I mean, and then you're exhausted when you come home. So, but they definitely never talked about legacy or anything like that. They were just working, and my mother worked at the store. My grandfather worked at the store. My grandmother worked at the store. My aunt worked at the store. I worked at the store. So that's just what you did. Yeah. But having said that, I definitely think, it's important to try to do good in the world, to do justice and love mercy, and hopefully to lead by example. So, and I mentioned early on that we adopted these 2 kids from Russia. So my wife and I didn't have any kids, and, on purpose, we decided, so although I have a brother, he's 9 years older. So for most of my memory, he wasn't in the house. I mean, he was gone. And my wife was an only child. And so I don't think we had the experience of living around other kids in a family. And I don't know whether I should blame that or not, but for whatever reason, neither my wife or I had much of a desire to have kids. And then all of a sudden, at age roughly 50, I said, maybe we should have some kids. So our life changed completely when we adopted these two kids from Russia. And I got lots of stories. We ain't got time.
Yeah,
Lots of good.
Yeah, we got time. So like whatever. If you want to talk about this, we can talk about it.
So we decided to adopt two kids, from somewhere in the world. We decided to adopt a kid from somewhere in the world. And so you work with a adoption agency. At the time we were living in Washington, D.C. And so we worked with this adoption agency in Washington, D.C. and decided that, we're already 50. So how long do you want to wait to get this thing done? So Russia, it was pretty straightforward. It's very, so we worked with this adoption agency, and they said, well, Mr. and Mrs. Price, you've passed all the screening stuff. We understand you like to adopt a child. Would you be willing to adopt two kids? And we said, why not? Adopt one. How much harder could it be adopted two? So they end up they have relationships with some orphanages in Russia. And one of the orphanages they had a relationship with was this orphanage in this place called Kalmykia. So Kalmykia, so Russia at the time, and even now, is composed of what they think of as states, which are called oblasts, and ethnic semi-autonomous countries like Chechnya is something that most people have heard of. Well, there are lots of these places, it turns out. And one of them is a place called Kalmykia, which is located pretty close to what used to be called Stalingrad, and is where the Volga River hits the Caspian Sea. And it's just on the other side from, the stands, essentially. Mm-hmm. So it was settled in like the 1600s by a group of Mongolians who had immigrated from China/Mongolia into the steppes of Russia. And then half of them 20 years later didn't like it and immigrated back, and they all got slaughtered when they were trying to get back to China. And the people that were left were called the remnant. And that's apparently the translation of Kalmykia is the remnant. So anyway, it's this tiny little country they think of themselves as a country, but really it's just kind of like a state, except they have their own president, and it's Buddhist. So and it's due south of Moscow, and they consider themselves to be the only Buddhist country in Europe, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, I digress.
No.
I'll just tell you one story. So we fly over, maybe two stories. We fly over to Russia, to Moscow, never been before. Well, first off, we have to take, so in China, if you're going to adopt in China, it's all very rule based. So the Communist Party in China has all these rules for what it takes to adopt in China. And you just got to follow all these rules and you get it done. And they don't really have rules in Russia. So in Russia, everything is done on the black market. So, but the black market works wonderfully. It's just that you got to do things on the black market. So the adoption agency says, now it's very straightforward. You're going to fly over to Moscow. You're going to be met in Moscow by a person. That person is going to take all your money that they require for this adoption, and then everything is just going to go very smoothly after that. And that's just the way it works. Don't worry about it. That's what's going to happen. Now, you have to take over to Moscow with you, and I don't remember what it is, but per child, it's a certain amount per child, and this money is to make sure everything goes smoothly, and it's like $20,000. Mm-hmm. So you're going to take $20,000. It's got to be an unmarked $100 bills. And the people at the orphanage and the prosecutor at the courts, they all have a list of presents they would like you to bring. And these presents are things like bottles of Jack Daniels and, very specific things that they have asked for. So you got to gather up all this essentially liquor that they want, and you got to go around to banks, because you can't just go to a bank and say, I need $20,000 in unmarked $100 bills. They say, we don't do that. We'll give you, we got these rolls of bills. We'll give you the bills, but we don't know if they're marked or unmarked. So you got to get $20,000 of $100 bills, and I got to look at every bill front and back and look for any, it turns out when you start looking at money, they got little crinkles in them, and they stuff that are on bills. And you got to put all those aside. You got to come up with $20,000 in unmarked $100 bills. So I got all this money. I got all the liquor. They also wanted candy. They wanted M&Ms and all, very specific, all this stuff they wanted. And so we fly over to Moscow, and we get off the plane, and we're supposed to be met. So I'm expecting there's going to be somebody there with a sign, welcome to Moscow, Mr. and Mrs. Prince. There's nobody there. There's nobody anywhere. We're in Moscow. There's nobody there. Nobody that looks like they're waiting for us. So we walk outside, and I happen to see, so there's this car in the drive-up lane, and it's got this guy kind of leaning against the car smoking a cigarette. And I just have this feeling, maybe that's the guy. And I walk up to the guy and I say, excuse me, because I don't know any Russian, excuse me, are you here to meet some people from America? He says, that's why I'm here. And he pulls something out. He says, the prices. I'm looking for the price. Well, I'm not looking, but the prices. Are you a price? And he said, yeah, that's us. That's me. So he said, okay, then you'll get in the car and follow me, and we will drive. So, not what I expected. So then we drive to this place. We're staying at this kind of like this little hotel. It's actually a former monastery in Moscow. And I know that this person is supposed to meet us that's representing the adoption agency. And so I'm outside. It's kind of like on a little park, kind of vaguely. And so I'm outside in the park, and I see this Mercedes drive up. And in the front of the Mercedes are these two Green Bay Packer linebackers, big guys. And in the back is this woman. And again, I just have this feeling that they're here for me. So I go back to the room, and then, 15 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. And I open the door, and there's this woman all dressed in black, and these two Green Bay Packer linebackers. And so, okay, I figure, this is kind of like what the adoption agency said. And so I'm expecting this lady is going to say something like, Mr. Price, welcome to Moscow. We're so happy you are here, for this adoption trip, and everything will be great. But she doesn't say any of that. She looks at me and she says, do you have the money? And I say, yes, I do have the money. And she says, she's still out in the hallway. She says, give it to me. So here's a stranger. I got $20,000 in unmarked $100 bills, and I'm just thinking, what am I supposed to do now? And so I figure, well, I guess I got to give her the money, because nothing's going to happen until I do. So I give her the money, and she says, thank you, goodbye. And so then she leaves. And from that point on, everything works like clockwork. I mean, there's no issues. There are no problems. We get on this little military, actually jet plane that's like a 6-seater that they had converted into a commercial airplane. We go to this little city. They meet us at the city. They take us to the orphanage. They put us up. I mean, I got other stories, but bottom line is we have a trial. They have a trial. And so they have a prosecutor. And the prosecutor represents the state, because it's in the state's best interest to make sure that they don't give their kids to just anybody. So the prosecutor is defending the rights of and is asking us really good questions, about, well, what gives you the right to take our little kids away from us? And why do you think you can be such a great parent? But it's all a show. I mean, it's already been decided because we gave all these bottles of liquor. So this is just something that'll go in the transcript so that if ever asked, they'll be able to pull out the transcript and be able to say, oh, yes, we had a trial and they answered the questions correctly. And so we thought they would make good parents, but it's all a done deal. You know, it's just the way it works in Russia. So we adopted the kids and we came home and okay, that's it. That's my short story.
No, that's really awesome, actually. And definitely that's amazing to adopt, especially, you know, given a little bit older in age. Like my dad was adopted, so definitely hits home in that sense. And obviously I'm here because of that adoption, you know, so
yeah.
keeps going in that sense. Any advice that you give to folks that might be thinking about service, either military or service to the country in another form, whether it's Peace Corps or something local that they can do? Any advice on somebody that might be on the fence as far as that, or what is service? What's service meant to you personally?
That it's a wonderful thing to do, and that you will look back on it as some of the greatest things you've done in your life, and that you're not losing time, you know, because some people would say, well, why would I want to serve in the military for a few years? Because all my peers will have been doing career things, and so I'll be behind them. So none of that makes any difference at all. You will absolutely look back on it as one of the greatest things you've done in your life. I recently had a conversation with the guy that beat me up in boxing, Steve Cohen, who at the age of 54, the guy decided to go back to law school and become a lawyer, which he did in New York City. And so now he's got a private practice in New York City. And we were talking about, he had some interns from Ivy League schools. And he asked them, he had a project for them. The project was to write a paper about, do you think there should be forced service in the United States? Either you got to serve in the military, or you got to, you know, when you graduate, you know, when you're 17 years old or 18 years old, you got to put in a year or two of service, whether it's the Peace Corps, or whether it's Teach America, or whatever it may be. And he gave that to these Ivy League interns that he had. And he said they all unanimously said, it doesn't make any sense. And no, there's no reason that we would want to do that. And I commented that I'm not surprised, and that when I went to Warton, my classmates at Warton, most of them knew exactly what they wanted to do for the rest of their lives. They were at Warton specifically. I mean, they were looking to take the right classes so that they could get the right summer job, so that the combination of the right summer job plus being at Warton would get them the career on Wall Street that they wanted to have, or with McKinsey or whoever. And that just blew me away when I was a kid, when I was going to graduate school there, getting an MBA, because I didn't even know exactly what I wanted to do. And here they knew what courses they wanted to take to further their careers. So my comment to Steve Cohen was, which, by the way, we have him on tap to be one of the speakers in February at our Jewish War Veterans. But anyway, was that there's a difference between kids that go to some schools, and I shouldn't say it this way, but I do, because I think they learn from their parents that the most important thing in life is your career and making money. And my experience has shown me that that's not the most important thing. And my parents were I would say they were happy. And I was certainly a happy kid growing up, and we didn't have much money and we didn't make a lot of money. And so it's not the job that you have, but it's what you do with your life. And serving in the military or serving for the Peace Corps can be wonderful things that can help society and help your country. And again, you will look back on that as some of the best things you've done in your life. Not did I work long hours at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or my consulting company. I mean, the things that I remember were the cool stuff I did in the military, not the specific engagements that I have working for some client, you know, I mean, that didn't even make, you know, it's a waste. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And then lastly, what in the next chapters of your life here, what do you think is going to bring you happiness?
Well, so I try to, the thing that brings me things I enjoy doing the most are volunteering. So Jewish war veterans, USS Colorado Submarine Association, and tutoring. So I was a tutor at Boulder High School, and now I'm changing programs because of COVID and going to be tutoring some Hispanic kids in math and science types of things. And doing those things, and also being a blue and gold officer for the Naval Academy. I really enjoy helping and doing things for others, and so I hope to be able to do that, and getting in and staying involved with the kids. With so here I am, 68, and I've got two kids who graduated from high school a few years ago, and one of them tried college and is definitely not going to go to college, but is working in the storeroom at Target, and the other one went to college for 3 years, and I mean, neither of them are great students, but went to college for 3 years and then changed programs essentially, and is now going to be a physical therapy assistant and has a girlfriend. And so what a wonderful thing. And I just didn't understand, until I was, 50 something years old, how much joy you can have through being a part of, participating in, hopefully not dictating, but just kind of hanging on the outskirts. Sasha. So my son's name is Sasha.
Mm-hmm.
Who would have thought that Sasha was mostly a girl's name in the United States? So he's had to grow up kind of like a girl named Sue. I mean, he'll be going to school in elementary and middle school and high school, and everybody's looking for Sasha Price, and we don't see a girl named Sasha Price. He's, oh, that's me, So he grew up and became a football player and a wrestler, and so he's this big guy, named Sasha, and he's got this girlfriend who has right now straight A's at University of Colorado Boulder, very smart, and honest to goodness, they love hanging out with us. I mean, they'll come over and ask, can we go to watch a movie together, or let's go to dinner together. I mean, we'll cook it here. Can we help you cook dinner? I mean, what fun to have these 20-something-year-old kids wanting, apparently, to hang out with us 60-something people. So volunteering and having a relationship with your kids are fun things to do, and so I'm just doing fun things.
Can I ask you, when you decided to adopt, was there something that happened in your life, or was it just like a culmination of events that was just I want to do this?
So I remember it well. It was November. It was Thanksgiving Day, 2000, and I'm watching TV because I got these football games on. And they had a public service announcement by Dave, and I forget his last name now, but Dave, the owner of Wendy's restaurants. And he said, I am adopted, and there are millions of kids around the world who are orphans looking for their forever parents, their forever homes. And if there's anything you can do to help them out, it would be wonderful. And I just said, well, I can do that. No brainer. And so I went downstairs and I said to Sherry, my wife, hey, let's adopt 2 kids, or let's adopt a kid. I just saw this thing. And she said, are you friggin' crazy? Are you out of your mind?
That's awesome.
But,
like when you see those public service announcements, you're like, man, like, why would they do this in the middle of a sporting event or what have you? But if you think about it conceptually, if you touch one person, you're going to change one person's life. Like, that would be worth the price of the infomercial or what have you. You know, I'm sure your kids will be forever grateful for the opportunity to have moved to the United States and, you know, be part of your family.
And even more importantly, I am grateful to them for having come into our lives. So it's definitely a two-way street, even with all the issues. And they both have lots of mental. So they essentially both had the equivalent of PTSD, except for kids, you know, they had early childhood stress, essentially, from growing up for 3 and 4 years in the orphanage, and actually from their birth mothers, who we don't know a lot about, but, you know, they had to give them up for adoption right away because neither of them had any money. And so it was a very stressful time in utero for the mothers, and growing up in an orphanage is not, this place was dirt poor, you know, so anyway, but it's called RAD, reactive attachment disorder, but for all intents and purposes, it's PTSD that you get as a kid, and it manifests itself. It presents with a lot of big time problems, and which they still are having to deal with. But, you know, so it's not a great thing, but it's, as in life, you know, it's like, so the other thing that we did, which I didn't touch on, is after we adopted, we decided it would be nice to have some foreign exchange students from Russia stay with us, you know, for, you know, a year. They come to the U.S. and they go for a year to school. And so we had a couple from Russia, and we had one from Serbia and one from Montenegro. And I'm still in touch with them. We still go visit them. So, before COVID, we'd go to Europe and we'd visit all these kids who are now, you know, in their 20s and 30s, or I guess they're in the 30s and 40s. But anyway, the reason I bring it up is I was talking about Sasha and Kira having issues, and Marina Ligiva, who is our daughter in really exchange student, but I think of her as a daughter in Moscow. And she says, Dad, because it's so nice when they call you Dad. She says, Dad, you worry about these things because you want life to be perfect, but life is not perfect. And that's true. And that's the ultimate thing, you know, is that, yes, we got Sasha and Kira in our lives and they've got issues, but life's not perfect. And, you know, there are going to be issues with everything, and you just got to accept that that's the way it is. So,
yeah, absolutely.
That's my wisdom for my Russian daughter.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time. It's been awesome talking to you and getting to know you in a different way. I hope that you also got something out of it and sharing, and that hopefully other people within the post get to know you a little bit better through this as well. And, you know, that we are unique in a community in ourselves. And I just, you know, I'm really humbled to be able to get these stories out to folks and understand that we have a lot of great people in our community that you maybe don't even know about. And so hopefully this endeavor will get that out there in that way.
Right. And I share your hope that we can do lots of these things and that we can use it so that our members know more about all of us. And I would love to reverse places and be able to interview you at some point in time. And, you know, just as a quick aside, you know, one of the other organizations that I belong to is the Denver chapter of the Submarine veterans. And the sub-vets, you know, our meetings are not that dissimilar from the Jewish war veterans, except that the first thing we do is everybody stands up and one at a time introduces themselves, even though we've heard it before, but introduces themselves and says what they did on a submarine. And I certainly, it's a wonderful thing. And you know, who knows who we have amongst us in the Jewish war veterans, you know, I mean, you know, that are former brigadier generals, you know, like Bernie is, or, you know, are former Green Berets like you are. And we just don't know anything about anybody else. And we ought to be doing stuff like that.
And not to mention, but like the community at large as well, you know, like I think a lot of people, I didn't know about Jewish war veterans until I saw a pamphlet of Jewish organizations for some other event, and they were one of the affiliate organizations on the back. And I was like, oh, okay, what's this about?
Yeah.
And I show up, and there's like 20 people, at the meeting, and schmoozing, having lox and bagels. And
yeah,
I was just like, okay. I mean, at that time, I was 35, so when there's people that are double your age, I don't know.
Yeah.
I take a great honor in helping out where I can, even though like Bernie makes it out like I'm curing something or bringing out the vaccine or something like that when I send a distro email. But it is what it is, and that's my contribution to keep the communication going with folks. And
it is greatly appreciated, what you do, because most of these other guys, they can't do what you do, even though you think of it as, oh, I'm just sending an email out. It's a big service.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. We'll definitely keep in touch, and I actually wouldn't mind if you interviewed me as well, and obviously
Excellent.
get to know me in that same capacity.
Yeah.
And I've got all the gear too, so it makes it easy in that sense. So we can do it either like this some other time, or we can do it when I get back, and actually hopefully in person when all this vaccine comes out and everybody can actually hang out together again.
Wouldn't it be nice to do it over coffee?
Yeah, totally.
But anytime. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you,
well,
Ben.
have a great day, and have a great rest of the year here, and hope all is well.
Thanks. Be safe.
Yep.
Over there. Okay.
Take care.
Okay.
The show is produced and engineered by myself, Ben, out of Denver, Colorado. Be sure to subscribe to our social media or wherever you consume content, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Big shout out to Mike Xavier. Thank you so much for letting us use your music as part of our show. Be sure to check him out as well on social media. And stay tuned for the next show.